our High Night Podcast People Power Anniversary live stream.
Hey
I'm
everyone.
Yes,
Hi, hello,
hello.
welcome.
Yeah, I am joined here by I'm Motzie. I'm joined here by Reg and Yoyi, my co-creators, and today we are celebrating
Hello.
the anniversary of the Philippines' People Power. Um, and for those of you who don't know, the People Power anniversary is celebrating the day that we were able to essentially, like, mostly break away from the dictatorial Marcos regime that lasted for many, many years. And it was a big celebration for everybody. But the reason we are doing this live stream now is one, celebrate it, but two, the fact that we are not free of the Marcoses because I don't know if you know this, but for our elections are coming up soon, and one of the candidates is the son of the previous Marcos dictator, who is buying his way into getting a lot of support. Well, not all of it. A lot of it is because people just like him for some reason, but
Misinformation.
misinformation. Also, just some people who generally just benefited from the regime. The
Mhm.
usual stuff. So we're trying to stop the rise of fascism. Welcome. um,
Yep. What a day. What a
what a
day to have
day.
with world events
Indeed.
and
What a
everything.
day.
Yeah, honestly, like let's try to let's do our own small podcasty ways to try to stop the ever looming dread of fascism that is no longer just ever looming, but you know what?
Right at our
Still,
doors.
yeah, right at our doorstep, and we're trying to kick them out. Um, so today we are going to be covering a couple of things, mostly like in reference to the past Marcos regime, the dictatorship of the Philippines, one of the worst, if not the worst, dictatorships in the Philippines. We will be covering parts of an episode that we did on Hainai called Nakaraan, which in part covered the experience of Mary, the main character, Mary's dad or Mary's tatay, um, who was alive during the Marcos era, and it's a part ghost story, but also part story about the time in which he lived. And then after that, we will be talking about uh, our the elections, but bear with us. We will,
Elections.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, elections. Just things about the Marcoses and why they suck.
Yeah, things about the Marxists and why they suck. So here's the thing: we already have a candidate that we like. We are wearing her colors, but it is not the goal of this live stream to make you
Mm-hmm.
vote for who we want. It is the goal of this live stream to make sure you do not vote for the
Vote
Marxists,
for who we
no
for
matter
who we do.
what. Listen, Marcos sucks. And like we have our
Yep.
issues with other candidates, but Marcos is literally the worst. So, you know, if you had any or if you know anybody who ever wanted to vote for him, don't. um, we have our candidate. We love Lenny Robredo, who is our candidate, but we're not gonna
Wearing the
make you
color.
vote for her because that's not the point of this. The point of this is to not vote for Marcos. Thank you.
Yep.
But we will make it a little fun too. Like we will make sure that you get entertained by our horror because
Shenanigans.
our shenanigans, our horror because as you know, any presidency under the Marcoses is a horror story. So
Yeah, what's scarier than the current political landscape?
exactly, what is? That's a good question. Okay. So we will start with Nakaraan. If everybody, does anyone have any like things to say before we continue?
Yeah, like if you wanna say anything in the chat, have any questions, absolutely feel free to interact with us. We'll give you a shout out. Appreciate any kind of attention. We're
Mm-hmm.
clingy that way.
Or clingy that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you comment, wait, let me open the chat because if you chat at any time, we will be seeing it. So one, behave, but also two, you will be able. We'll shout you guys out. We'll be able to like make sure that your questions are answered. Sometimes we might bring up the chat overlay, so if you don't want your stuff to be seen, you have to like let us know. So yeah,
Mhm.
communication, please.
Communication.
Mm-mm.
Mhm.
Yes. And with that, we'll start. Yeah, we'll now play episode
Nakaraan.
Nakaraan.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yes. By the way, this I believe we're not playing the whole episode.
No, we're just gonna play the part. We're gonna play the intro, and then we're gonna play the part with Mary's dad.
Yeah.
Mary's tatay. I keep saying Mary's dad.
Mhm.
It's Maddie's tatay.
Mhm.
Who and his experience and his little ghost story. Okay,
Huh?
so let me get this up. Get this ready. Okay, share system audio. Oops. Here we go. There he is. Okay, here is the okay. So 10:15. So we'll start from the beginning, then we'll skip to the part. Let me know if you can hear it. Good. Ooh, look at that.
You're listening to Hainai by Motzie Dapul. Episode 11, Nakaraan.
So I will skip to the story so that we can enjoy. Okay. That will be at 10:15. Okay. Here we
Yeah,
go.
we don't need dialogue.
Yeah, we don't need that. Here we go. Okay. 3, 2, 1, playing.
So, I want to tell you a story. It happened to someone I knew way back in the mid-70s. He was working for a company operating within the campus of the University of the Philippines, or UP. He always worked late shifts, was always the one to close after dark, always seen as reliable by his bosses. In a country on the equator, the sun rises and sets at pretty much the same time all year, and by the time this man closed up shop, it'd be near midnight, which was dangerous with the curfew, especially in UP, back when the entire country was under a bloody dictatorship. But he did it anyway. He had such a genial demeanor about him. It was like its own magic. People liked him, they trusted him, and more than once he got himself out of trouble simply by talking, by being agreeable. His wife always worried his luck would run out one day, but even he wasn't stupid enough to be out after midnight, in the very least because none of the jeepney routes dared risk that either. Jeepneys, a remnant of the World War II days commonplace around the country, would always make stops around the campus, so he was well acquainted with their schedules. He'd leave at 10:30, take the last jeep, arrive home at 11 without fail. There was one night that was different, though. One night, he got on the last jeepney, like usual. It was beautiful. Vibrant red, painted so bright it was visible even in dead of night. The driver gave him a friendly enough nod in the rear view as he paid, and the man had one arm hitched over the back of the long cushioned bench, feeling the night air on his face as they went down one of the UP's rounded roads. The second time the man looked up, he saw the driver's eyes, fixed on him in the mirror. His pupils were pure black, so dilated they stood out stark against the whites of his wide eyes. When the driver saw the man look back, his eyes went right back to the road, and the man wondered if the long day had him on edge. He thought that for about as long as it took for the driver to hit a familiar intersection and turn left instead of right. "Excuse me," he said. "My stop is that way." He was genial, agreeable. He feared what the driver would do if he was otherwise. The driver said nothing. The man didn't know what to think, as the jeepney driver circled around, drove them right back the same roads, eyes flitting between the rear-view mirror and the road. It took an entire 20 minutes to near where the driver had changed direction. The man sat at the very back of the jeep, made the decision right then. If the driver turned left once more, he'd have to jump. It would hurt, and he'd probably get cut up on the asphalt in the process, but if this driver didn't do something that hurt him, then the time the man would spend trying to get home on foot until curfew enforcers picked him up absolutely would. As they neared the intersection, the driver spoke suddenly. "Please don't jump, Kuya," he said. He sounded terrified, but sincere. His eyes were fixed on the rear view, and the man thought he saw tears. And when they arrived at the intersection, the driver turned right. It was 11 by then. When they finally arrived at the man's stop, all the lights were off. He had to navigate by the distant, intermittent lights of passing cars. "Kuya," said the driver as he was about to disembark. "In the mirror, when I looked at you, you had no head." And the man understood. "Thank you, Manong," he said. "My wife is a babaylan," he added. "When you get home, burn all your clothes." The driver looked relieved, nodding seriously at the man's words. With one last wave, he pulled away, his beautiful, blood-red jeep rounding the corner. When he got home, the man locked the gate behind him and removed all his clothing before entering the house. He set his clothing on fire in the garage, the smell alerting his wife. All he said when she came and draped a towel over his naked body was, "I like that shirt." She had him stand in front of a mirror, looking for signs. Then she wrapped his head in steamed water in a pot beneath him, cleansing him with oils. He slept well that night. The next night, he took the same route, in a different jeep, a different driver. Nothing unusual. It took him another 2 months before he saw the red jeep again, and the driver in it was not the same one he spoke to that night. When he got to speaking with the young man that was at the wheel, he learned that the driver he'd met had come home one night and burned all his clothes, which made his family worry. But then he'd been all right for a few weeks. Then one night, his jeep broke down after his last stop. He tried to get home on time, but he'd been out past curfew. They only found his jeep. The omen of death, it seemed, had been for him, not my father, my tatay. Or maybe the omen had nothing to do with it. Maybe it was just bad luck that he ended up being one of the many who disappeared under the Marcos government. They never found his body, so... Fight blind.
Motzie Dapul and me, and
Went a little too far there, but yeah. So that was basically the story. And we didn't really comment on anything. I think we're still kind of new to this, new to the reaction thing. So let me just stop screen share. Reg will be back in a bit. Unfortunately, there seems to be widespread, um, what do you call it? Connection issues. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed that little short story. And what did you think, Yoyi? Have you heard it before?
I mean, I'm not gonna lie. It's the first time I heard that
Oh,
excerpt,
okay, no
and yeah,
worries.
okay. The good thing is I could give my genuine reaction since it is
That's
the first time
true.
I've heard of it. And
Mhm.
when I was listening, I was like, "Holy shiz!" It sends chills down my spine. Ugh.
Yeah, so that particular one, so I realized I spoiled it because I was like, oh, her tatay, but then I was like, wait, I never revealed it was her tatay till the end. Like, oopsie.
Whoop.
Well, I'm my own worst enemy when it comes to storytelling. But yeah, so the reason that we bring that particular story up, that was episode 11, Nakaraan, which is part of our podcast, Hainai podcast, which is probably why you're here. Although some people might have accidentally stumbled on onto this, so welcome. And the reason we bring that up is because that particular story was inspired by many real stories during the Marcos era. And we keep saying Marcos era because we want to remind people that that family is what is the reason that all of these like horror stories popped up. I think a lot of horror stories are very famous for coming from the Marcos regime. And that's very interesting because many horror stories for a lot of other countries or a lot of other people come from World War II, because you really like you kind of like focus in on a horrific event in a country. And I actually like was discussing this with a lot of other people, which is that like why are there so many why are there so many like horror stories that are coming up now. And basically horror stories come up during an event of great horror. Like that's kind of just a given, right? Like when something horrible happens to a country or a place, people remember it by remembering horror stories about it, being like uneasy about the whole thing. And a lot of horror stories come from the Marcos era, rather than, I mean, we have a lot of World War II horror stories, but we have quite a few Marcos era stories because that was the last big, well, that was the older last big terrible thing that happened to the country. We do have a lot of horror stories coming out now for very time for reasons for very now reasons. I'm sure you all know if you're Filipino. But yeah, like dictatorships, mass death usually cause horror stories. So in this particular one, we had the story of a familiar urban legend, actually, that is very. The urban legend itself is not completely original to me. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. Yoyi, have you heard the jeepney urban legend?
Um, I think I have at some point,
Mm-hmm.
sort of.
Yeah, the
I
one
have
with
heard it
the
around.
yeah
Yeah,
the lady with the decapitated head in the jeep. Have you heard of that one?
that one in particular, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. That's
Mm.
yeah. I feel like I don't know. It feels like a very UP specific horror story. I I
Ah, I
I
see.
went looking for it and I found it only in one place, which is like a blog. So I was like, okay, so
Mm.
it does exist. I didn't just make this up and think that, but there are a lot of
Mhm.
stories that we hear as we grow up that don't seem to have a source. So I found that really interesting. But basically, same like kind of a similar deal. There was a lady who was going home in the jeep, and the jeepney driver turned another direction. She was very scared. But then later on, he would tell her that he saw her. Um, basically, she had no head in his rear view, so he believed
Ooh.
that she was cursed, and
Mhm.
he wanted to like, or in some, I think some of the stories said she had a ghost that was haunting her, and so he wanted to confuse it by moving a different direction. And then when he finally
Ah,
dropped her off, yeah, so when he finally like, it's that's a very like common thing in the Philippines, I think, like going to another place so that it doesn't follow you home.
true,
And
true. Yeah.
yeah, essentially he dropped her off and he told her to burn all her clothes, And yeah, same deal. Like to make sure, the parts that I added included the one, of course, like it's Mary's tatay, and also the fact that what do you call it? Like the jeepney driver dies afterwards, because I was thinking like it's so interesting. Usually in horror stories, it's the person who the horror story happens to that sees the horrifying thing, but in this case, it was the jeepney driver who saw the horrifying thing, like,
Mm,
and
mm,
told her, even though the horror story was technically about her. So I found that a really interesting, like, flip to the
mm.
subject. But I also wanted to be like, okay, so what if the horror story was actually happening to him? And that was like my thought process when I had him. Essentially, he died at the end of the story, not because of any curse that it's not like directly because of any curse, but because
Right.
he was essentially disappeared, and or essentially like killed by the regime, which is a common thing that happened in the Philippines. Oh, hey, Reg is back.
Hello, I'm back. So sorry,
Yes.
I just had some technical difficulties.
No worries.
Uh,
We were basically just discussing the story and how, and like the real life horror story of the Marcos regime.
Mm.
You know,
The
the
inspiration, yeah.
backdrop
Mm.
against which the story was set, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So it's very interesting. Like in a lot of our stories, the deaths happen because of the supernatural. But in this particular one, death happened. Maybe it was connected to supernatural, but for the most part, just happened because people tended to disappear and die during the Marcos regime. It just kind of happened sometimes, especially when you were poorer or when you were an activist. So that was like something we wanted to show a little bit, especially when you were like the curfew was very infamous. Other people have told stories around the curfew during the Marcos era. I believe one of the biggest ones was actually written by was it Budget, or was it like the was it After Midnight? I think it was called. Do you remember this comic? I don't know if any of you remember.
Which
No,
one?
I'm not sure.
Wait, which one is this?
It's the last no, that's not Last Scene After Midnight. It was a Marcos era black and white drawn by Kajo. I don't know if it was Budget who
Was it
wrote
Sir
it.
Russ?
Oh,
Was
it
it
was,
Sir Russell Molina?
yeah, Sir Russell Molina wrote this, and it was
Mm.
basically a
But
story
is it?
about these teens or young adults who were meeting up after the curfew during Marcos era.
Mm, mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, which was
Yeah,
very dangerous.
yeah, which was
Uh,
very dangerous, of
Very
course.
Indeed,
risky
yeah.
at the time. Yeah, my
Hmm.
mom. Yeah, like you couldn't even go out to, like, to buy medicine for your family if they needed it. Like, not like you couldn't go out to get essentials. Like my mom would tell me stories. Nah, um, like my mom would tell me stories about how, yeah, because I think she was like 10 years old at the time,
Wow. Yeah. Hmm.
10 or like in her teens. Yeah, like yeah, like once it got dark, like that's like you really had, like people really had to be off the streets. And
Hmm.
there were always stories of, yeah, there were always stories of people who, yeah, like they disappear and the families could do nothing about it. And it wasn't even like a hidden fact that they'd be taken. Like it was very, like the like authorities at that time, like they wouldn't even like try to hide the fact that they'd take your family members. They just hide the behind the reason that it was, oh it, well, it was against the law for them to be out in the first place, so it's not really
Yeah.
our fault.
Yeah, it was essentially widespread, like it was basically wide net of justification for a lot of the police corruption that still happens today. Like it's not even because like Marcus himself told every single person to like arrest everybody. That's not how it worked. It was more like just it was they were allowed to do whatever they wanted between the hours of, I don't know what hours were they, like was it 11
uh,
and 4? I forgot the exact hours of the curfew.
I'm not sure either. I think it changed through the years because
Yeah.
martial law lasted 14 years, I think.
Yeah, 14 years, and the entirety of his presidency spanned 20 years, or is it 20 or 19 years?
Around 20 years he
Around
was.
20 years, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, he was president in 19 in the 60s, and
Mhm.
then yeah, and then he declared martial law in 1972.
Exactly. So essentially, we are just like, here, we're bringing up a timeline, but you can kind of look this up. Like, a lot of the information is pretty public. And honestly, like, outside of the Philippines, it is not like there is very little way that Marcos can, like, stop people from seeing, like, the legacy of his family. And so one of the things we wanted to discuss, like, during this live stream, apart from the fact that Marcos sucks, because, Marcos sucks, is that we wanted to kind of talk about, like, why he's still so powerful, like why we want to, like, who our candidate is, and like why we want the future to be a little better. Just because, one, Marcos is still, he's not necessarily leading in the polls, but he still has a good grip on a lot of the Philippines. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of misinformation is
Well,
being
yeah.
spread. There's still like a
A lot
real,
of surveys, though, he is still leading. Very worrying.
yeah. Although if you look at the Manila Bulletin survey, it's literally just because they can't do statistics. Have
Yeah,
you
yeah,
seen
yeah.
that
That's
one?
true.
There was
And
like,
the surveys are really just like thousands per survey. It's a very small sample of the population, but
exactly. It's a
yeah.
false, it's a bad sample size. But also, just I remember, if you guys read Manila Bulletin, then you have to know that, one, they do very bad statistics.
Yeah.
Because they did one poll in which they polled Twitter. And if you know Twitter, you can only poll up to, was it, three or four choices in one tweet,
Hmm.
and then you have to separate the polls. Now that doesn't work, because if you separate the polls, then you will have 100, like, different 100 percentages instead of like the same 100%. And so they had polled Marcos separately with one other person, which essentially gave him a 50-50 like, amount, whereas they had polled three or four people in the first tweet, essentially
Yeah.
dividing it to 25%. And then they made a graph saying that Marcos got, like, I don't know, like 57% of the votes or something, and
Yeah.
from two
Yeah,
Very
they're
choices.
not accurate. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's
not
incredibly
accurate.
inaccurate. So please,
Yeah.
whenever you see some polls like that, you try to, like, look into it. Like, even if they
Hmm.
did the statistics accurately, it's a very small sample size, so you have to, like, take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, for sure. But at the same time, we can't be too complacent because, yeah, like Pulse Asia and SWS surveys, like, I guess they have like the best methodologies. And yeah, even with the bad sample size, you still don't want to be too complacent. So we
Exactly.
still have a lot of work to
Mhm.
do, guys.
Yeah. Plus,
Which is why we're doing this.
unfortunately, yeah. Plus, unfortunately, our election people are not that trustworthy either. Comelec,
Absolutely.
the Commission of
Absolutely.
Elections, I believe it is also not very trustworthy. Even though many people have pointed out that Marcos has had many lapses in revealing and or paying his taxes,
Mhm.
and even criminal record.
They just let him go.
Yeah, they're
They
just
just let
letting
him
him.
go.
They're letting him run, which is, it's a lot
Yeah.
of, like, questionable behaviors all throughout
Yeah.
Comelec. It's like, the corruption spans quite a few people, and of course, like, many of these people were alive and well and thriving during the Marcos regime. So you
Yeah.
don't know who is, and you don't know who didn't, and it's just a mess. It's a big mess. And if you want to learn more, you should watch a little bit, documentaries, like the most famous one right now, which is The Kingmaker,
Hmm.
with Imelda Marcos, who
Yeah.
openly admits that she's just
He
terrible.
sucks.
Yeah, she openly admits that she doesn't like the truth. She shows off all her wealth, her fabulous wealth that she stole from that
Yeah.
her family stole. And I do have, like, some statistics here and some, like, information
Hmm.
here, but
Yeah. And
not
like,
going to. Oh yeah, sorry.
oh
Go
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. No, no, no. I was just gonna talk about like not just Imelda, like there's also like this clip going around from the Kingmaker where yeah, Bongbong Marcos, he's the one running for president right now. They interview
Mhm.
him, and he admits like at one time he wanted to fly home to the Philippines. I think it was when he was flying home from exile, when he
Mhm.
was able to go back home, and then he's basically like oh, I had to call a friend. I had to borrow money from him because I didn't have enough money to fly first class. Like I've never gone home in coach. That's so embarrassing. I've always flown in first class. It's very yeah.
That's
You could say like
horrifyingly like elitist and terrible and out
absolutely,
of touch.
absolutely,
I've never
absolutely.
not flown first class. I'm like,
Yeah, and if you see I was trying to look for a clip of it. Unfortunately, I can't. But you can watch it on the Kingmaker. But you can see like even during the interview, like he was very nonchalant and uh nonchalant about the whole thing. Like he thought it would be funny sharing that story. And this is they went at the time of this interview. Like he was already in government. I think this was before he announced running for president. Or like maybe or I don't know when Kingmaker was made, but it was really only a few years back.
yeah,
So he was
Kingmaker
already
was
like either a
made. I think.
governor.
Mhm.
Yeah, he was already like either a senator, I think, or a governor. So like so you can't even give him the benefit of saying like, oh, he was just a kid when he said that. No, like he still had this attitude way into
Yeah.
his
Was
adulthood.
he not a teenager during the Marcos era? Like, was he not like literally not even
He
a
was in
child?
he was in his 20s and
He was in his 20s. Oh my god! I
he
even
was in
no.
his
Aimee was
20s
a
and
teenager, right?
yeah.
Jaime
He was in his
Marcos was
20s
another
and he
one.
was vice governor of Ilocos Norte.
Yeah, this is insane. Like literally, like during a dictatorship, he was in power, and people still act like, "Oh no, he's fine. It's not
He
his
was a
dad."
child, he wasn't
Yeah,
aware.
like his dad. It's his dad's issues, like not his. You cannot blame the son
Yeah,
for the father's
absolutely.
actions. I'm like, I absolutely can. He was an adult, and he has not done anything to make up for his dad's actions. So yeah, no, that's his fault
Absolutely.
as much as his dad's. But
Yeah. And
kind
that's
of
the
going into
thing.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's the
go
thing
on.
though. Like he
Mhm.
gets a lot of the rationale of his base is
Mhm.
that he's his father's son. He's gonna continue his father's legacy. Um aside like barring the fact that his father's legacy was like all the infrastructures were at the expense of the Philippine economy and Filipino lives, um barring that fact, Mark, like the only thing they have in common is that they're both thieves and they both
Mhm.
suck
Mhm.
and and they're both going to hell. But like intellectually, academically, like professionally, they're nothing alike. Ferdinand Marcos was evil, but he was smart. Like
Mhm.
you'd have to be hella smart to pull off a dictatorship like that.
Mhm.
Ferdinand Marcos was his own lawyer when he was in jail, and he had to defend himself, and he won his own case in court.
Mhm.
He was well spoken. Hi, who is this? Like
We
a
have a
visitor.
visitor. We have a cat visitor. But go on. Sorry.
Yeah, we have a visitor. Eh,
You
he was
got distracted.
Ferdinand Marcos was very well spoken,
Mhm.
um, and like corruption and ethics aside, like he was able to accomplish like infrastructure. Yes, it was at the expense of the Philippine economy, but yeah, like Ferdinand Marcos was like this, like he did have this reputation of gravitas and intelligence. Meanwhile, Marcos,
Yeah,
his
Bongbong
Marcos
Marcos.
Jr.
Mhm.
If you see him in debates, he's not well spoken. He has to have, I think during debates he has to have the questions handed to him beforehand.
Mhm.
Um, I think of he famously has declined two two national interviews, two interviews with the other presidential aspirants. He's declined a
Yeah.
national debate.
Essentially.
Yeah, essentially he's only yeah, and he's always been like, oh, so he can't attend because there's a schedule of conflict. But he got caught because his apparent schedule of conflict was with a TV interview, and the host of that TV show basically told everyone, oh, by the way, they're the ones who gave us the schedule, not us. It
Mhm.
wasn't like we didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
So
So
they purposefully avoided these interviews. probably because they know like he's gonna sound like a dumbass
Yeah,
amongst like these other like very well spoken individuals. um
exactly.
yeah, he's famous. Yeah, like I think like of the presidential aspirants, he's had the longest political career, actually more than 20 years now, nearly 30. I think around 20ish years as governor of Ilocos Norte, and then like 6 years as senator. And he's famously done nothing,
Yeah,
basically nothing.
basically nothing. And I just wanted to like bring this up because there are some like sources that kind of mention there are many Marcos supporters, of which there are actually quite worryingly many. But of the many Marcos supporters, many of them deny that the Marcoses both stole billions from the Philippines and also
Mhm.
had like were charged and told to forfeit those assets back to the
Yeah.
Philippines. Not all of them, by the way. There's still a lot that's like not accounted for, and a lot that was forgiven because they were close friends with Duterte in this era.
Uh-huh.
But there is like extensive records of essentially like how much they owed, the Swiss banks that they had hidden the money in, like all of that, and they deny it. They deny it completely. And yet there are people like there's literally the retired Chief Justice Artemio Panganiban mentions in a 2021 article for the Inquirer the exact amounts that they were told to pay back and the exact amounts of money that they had basically like legally had to give back to the Philippines. So even if you argue whether or not they actually did it, which for the most part they did, and then but there's still a big chunk that they didn't give back. It happened. They were charged. Imelda was charged back in 2018. She's still outside. She's still not in jail. So it's like the Marcoses have just been the reason they want to win this election is not for the Philippines, was to keep themselves out of jail. That is literally what it
Absolutely.
is. Yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
I think we're getting tired of like just getting angry, like
Yeah.
and kind of like mentioning all the because
Oh,
we
and
can
also
give you
fun
so much
fact.
information.
I get like, well, not kind of a fun fact. Yeah, like the Marcos family, they can't go to the states,
Yeah,
to the
because
United States. They're wanted for by the
they're
FBI
criminals.
for tax
Yeah,
evasion.
yeah, they are tax evading criminals who are wanted in the United States,
Yeah,
and
how are you
mhm.
going to be president of a country and not be able to visit the United States?
Exactly, exactly. They're literally criminals in the U.S. And also, it's very funny that people are like, um, like we don't need the U.S. The U.S. is wrong, and I'm like, over this, like not over everything else. Like like of all the things that you could say the U.S. sucks for, it's this.
A lot of, yeah. Yeah, the US does. Yeah, the
Yeah,
US is in everything. It's still an imperialist power that we don't want to empower too much, but at the same time, it's still important for diplomatic relations.
yeah. Diplomatic relations to not have
Hmm.
a tax evading president who is not welcome in other countries. Good God. But yeah, like
God.
essentially, like for people who don't know this, it's very easy. That's the other thing. It's very easy to get all this information everywhere. It is just they are working so hard not to have this information public. But it's very easy to get all this information of the criminality of the Marcos family everywhere. But to be on a more positive note, we did want to mention like the reason we bring this up for election time because we want to I guess like we don't want to force you to elect who we want, but at the same time we do want you to know like why we have decided on Lenny Robredo, which is our candidate of choice. We are wearing her pink colors.
Mhm.
And just off the top of my head, one, she doesn't have any criminal records that Marcus has. Two,
Mhm.
she has authored many like bills and laws
Mhm.
in her time
Hmm.
as vice president, or in her time as
Congresswoman.
congresswoman. Yeah, sorry, congresswoman, not vice president, and she is vice president right now. The third thing is there people have essentially like been going through her Facebook history. It's very funny. So, because she's been a congresswoman for a long time, there have been like posts to the Facebook of things that she has done. She has been on the ground, on the scene for calamities, for fundraisers, for all the things to help other people. And it is very well documented, all the way back to like 2014. So like the if
Yeah,
you look at like these were far far before she ever decided to become president. Like these aren't campaign, like these weren't made up for the campaign. These have been her actions since well before we even knew who she was, quite frankly.
absolutely. Even before
Hmm.
she was congresswoman, she was already working as a lawyer. She
Mhm,
was quite known for working pro bono cases for women, children, and farmers.
mhm.
That's why she's so beloved in Bicol,
Yeah.
her hometown.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, her hometown. And I think she ended up stepping up to the plate of national government when famously her husband Jesse Robredo, what was it? He died in a plane crash or he was shot.
I think he would died in a plane crash. But I have
Wait,
to.
let me check. Let me check.
Oh, we don't want to like give him misinformation. Not
Yeah,
Marcus.
yeah, yeah. How did
Mhm.
he die?
Yeah. So sorry, we're like just
Yeah,
big.
sorry. It crashed. His plane crashed.
Mhm.
And he was also and he was also like a well liked politician as well.
Mhm.
And it was Lenny who decided to like take up the mantle, and that's how she ended up in
Government.
national government as a congresswoman, where she did a lot of work. She worked really hard, and all at the same time while raising three amazing daughters. One is in med school in ASMPH. One went to Harvard,
Oh yeah.
and one went to
Actually went to Harvard.
NYU. Yeah, actual Harvard
Yeah,
for
not Marcus's.
yeah. That's another thing. One went to Harvard, one went to NYU, and they all got there on scholarships.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, we could like sit here all day kind of talking about why Lenny is great, but you can kind of look this up. You can kind of like look through her social media, like documents all of her projects. During the
Yeah, she got
pandemic, she was
a
very active. Um,
she got a sort of shout out from the one and only Cher.
Somebody tweeted at Cher about Lenny Robredo, and Cher was like, "Who is Lenny? What's a Lenny?" And they were like, "Oh, she's the she's campaigning to become
Wait,
president.
yeah,
She's
I
an
can
amazing
share
woman."
screen. I have the tweet
Yes,
now.
do it. It's very funny.
It's
Like
so
somebody just
funny.
decided to tweet at Cher about Lenny, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just one person, but like the fucking Pinoys, like did they just flood her?
I don't know why. I mean,
Flood
not
her
complaining, but
Twitter?
why? Like I've lost like all the context for why they decided to just yeah. Let me allow it.
Here you go.
It's so funny. Yeah, let's see it.
I saw this because I
Excuse,
do
don't know
follow Cher
Lenny.
on Twitter. I had to double check. Like number one, is this legit? Is this her verified account? It
It
absolutely
is.
is.
Yeah.
That's
Mm.
her. And secondly, I had to check like is she actually talking about Lenny Robredo?
Yeah. Go down. What does
And
it say?
where was it?
Yeah, she responds. She says something about how like she supports the like amazing women who like works hard for
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because
uh,
someone replied to her, "Oh, she's currently the only woman running for president for Philippine elections in 2022." And she was like, "Yeah, go women. I support women women empowerment and everything." Yeah, like a whole tweet about that, and it was so funny.
it was so mind-boggling. I'm like, oh, cool. I guess everyone's like on that. That was so funny. That was really funny. But yeah, like essentially,
That was a
just
moment.
it was a moment.
Mm.
But yeah, like in general, like a lot of if you follow Filipino artists, you may have seen many of them switch over to pink. Even our own High Night podcast Twitter has a banner that says "Kulay Rosas ang bukas," which means the color pink is the future. Um, and it essentially like we are hoping because this is one of the best candidates that we have. Obviously, there are other candidates, and you guys can like do your research, kind of figure out which one works for you. There's only one wrong answer, and it's Marcos, and the rest of it is like there are issues. Obviously, like each candidate has some issue, some small issue, or like even a big issue, depending
Mm.
on like what you're looking at. But at the same time, the main drive of this particular people power live stream is to remind you that no Marcoses. We should have like driven them out of the country long ago. They should have stayed out. We did drive them out of the country. They should have stayed out. um,
Yeah,
but somehow they got
Mm-mm.
back.
yeah.
They wormed
And
their way
now
into
and
politics
now the Beatles doesn't want to ever go back to the Philippines
because of the
because of the
Marcoses. Yeah,
Marcos. So yeah,
for
just
all
like a
you Beatles
little
fans there.
yeah, so just like a little background on that.
Mhm.
Because I did mention this in the Discord, like, oh, we're gonna share some fun facts. So the Beatles came here in maybe the 70s, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
this
Mm-hmm.
was during the Marcos presidency. So they came here on their world tour.
Mhm.
They
Mm-hmm.
and they were just supposed to do like a regular concert, which they did, and apparently like it was really great. Like they had like a big audience, but apparently Imelda, because you know she just has to have everything. She also wanted them to play at like their like a formal dinner, like at the like in the palace in the
Mhm.
in the presidential palace, and you know the Beatles are just like, no, that's not what we came here to do. That's not part of our itinerary. Understandably, like they've been touring, they have like a full packed schedule. They're gonna want to rest where they can.
Mhm.
And I guess there was some miscommunication, a lapse in communication, I guess, or something. Because Imelda was fully expecting the Beatles at her dinner thing, and the Beatles didn't show up. They made a huge deal out of it. They like she invited like a whole bunch of people. She publicized the event, so there were like people waiting outside the palace. And then when the Beatles didn't show up, you had like news, you had like the media, like news cameras, like zooming in on like the empty chairs and zooming in on the sad faces of the apparently sad faces of the children who went all the way there and waited so long for the Beatles, but the selfish Beatles didn't show up. And you could and yeah, absolutely emotionally manipulative journalism. And then you had like and then there were clips of Imelda basically like throwing a tantrum. And then yeah, she I don't know if she explicitly said anything, but basically the treatment of the Beatles after that, the public treatment of them was very horrible. The first time I read about this was in some biography I saw. It just happened to be one of those things you have at the resort lounge for people who were just yeah like sitting around.
Wild. That's so wild.
Yeah,
Ah, that's interesting.
it was so wild.
Mm.
So like apparently the day after that a day after their supposed like palace appearance, they like hospital hotel staff treated them badly. They gave them like questionable food. On their way to the airport, they were mobbed. They
Oh yeah.
had to. They were chased off the Philippines. Basically, are even quotes about how um, like they finally got on the plane, but then the pilot told them like, oh, I forget his name. They told the crew like, oh, your manager has to get off the plane. We still have to talk to him about something, and literally like he was fearing for his life. He basically told the Beatles and their crew like, tell my wife I love her. I don't know if I'll come back. Like it was really that awful and scary
Ooh.
for them.
Mhm.
And you know, I have a clip. I found a clip here of I found a
It's Willem
clip here
Dafoe.
showing
Here we go. I love this clip. Let me open it up real quick.
it's an interview of who is this? I think this is this George Harris? This is George Harrison.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, you're gonna show the Willem Dafoe clip after.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
so sorry if I got this Beatle member wrong.
Oh no, you're gonna make so many people angry. Okay, here we go.
Yep,
Live.
here we go. So this was years after, and they're talking. I think they were talking about the Beatles like going to Hawaii, but this was the time when the Marcoses have been exiled already and were living in Hawaii. So
Oh my goodness. Okay.
okay.
Ooh.
And you didn't see Julian?
No, I just called him on the phone. Can't go to Honolulu anymore, though, can you?
From Maui or just...
No, just because of Marcus.
Oh, yes. Well, we heard that today that he might be on this.
Well, he tried to kill us, President Marcus.
Yes, but you want to review that?
Yeah, well, we went to Manila back in the 60s, the Beatles on a tour, and we did the concert. The next morning, we were in bed, and somebody knocked on our door of the hotel suite saying, "Come on, you're supposed to be at the palace." And we said, "No, we're not. We weren't. We didn't have any engagement anywhere." But somebody, some smart guy had said, "Sure, I'll get the Beatles up to the palace." And they said, "Turn on the TV." We turned the television on, and there was this big palace with lines of people. And the guy saying, "Well, they're still not here yet." And we watched ourselves not arrive at the palace. But we were never supposed to be there. And so what they did was they said, "Beatles snub first family," which I'm glad we did. See, even in those days we had taste. And so consequently he set the mob on us and tried to beat us up, which they did. They beat up a lot of people with us and wouldn't let the airplane leave Manila until Epstein, our manager, had to get off the plane and give back the money we earned at the concert. So that's what I think of Marcus. Old twat he was.
What a wonderful way to put it. What a twat.
Right.
That last part.
Oh
Sorry.
my lord. Yeah, I mean, like, the best way I think would just be to get a bunch of like famous people to mention like their memories. Like, oh, play the Willem Dafoe clip.
Okay, yeah, this is a fun one. I learned this like only like last year or 2 years ago, I think. Fun fact: Willem Dafoe, yes, that Willem Dafoe
In
was
People
part
Power.
of the People Power Revolution. He was
Oh.
there.
I feel like we didn't like properly express what the People Power Revolution was, because it was like basically we said that it was when we ended the Marcos regime, but it was also a like thousands, tens of thousands of people flooded the largest street, the largest like highway, like
Road,
EDSA, yeah,
EDSA.
which is the Epifanio de los Santos Avenue.
Avenue.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
essentially, like tens of thousands of people flooded the roadways to protest Marcos. It was the like probably the biggest protest, like I guess
It
ever.
was the first non-violent revolution in history.
Mm-hmm. I mean, non-violent in how it was done, rather than So it was very well known for that. Essentially, people were like they made like a gigantic, like the biggest possible like group, and stayed together in order to like protest this.
Yeah,
And
it was absolutely big on international news. I saw this clip before. I tried looking for the clip again. Unfortunately, I couldn't find it, but it was a clip of this what do you call this? This new news channel, and they were covering in America actually, and they were covering EDSA. They were documenting it, and one of the lines that I remember was in 80s American accent. Historically, America is also known for for bringing democracy to the Philippines. But today, the Philippines is teaching the world about true democracy.
Dang.
So
Dang.
that was really that's really great. Yeah.
Okay, show the Willem Dafoe. I'm just
And-
like it always like makes you think of it.
And all of that, Willem Dafoe was there. This was
Yeah,
in
Willem Dafoe's there. Okay, let me share it as well.
Okay. I'll share it.
Yes, please. It boggles the mind every time. we saw this clip like going around a couple of years ago, and I was like, what?
Yeah, exactly. That was also my reaction.
It may have been like the first time he even like mentions it. Like I feel like that might have been like the absolute like the first time it was ever mentioned, which is like wild. Okay, go ahead and play it.
Platoon was a movie that took a long time to get made. Oliver Stone saw lots of actors because he first just wanted to cast a group of actors and then decide what characters they would play later. He said, yeah, okay, you're going to be in this movie. I don't know which role, which was kind of an interesting approach. I arrived in the Philippines, and my plane was the last plane in because there was a revolution. Sit tight, the movie's canceled, we'll get you out when we can. So for about 3 or 4 days, me and a couple of other people that were there ahead of time were out on the streets with the people. And it was an incredible feeling because it was a revolution that happened for the most part without violence. They got the movie back on track and we made it. The fact that that death scene in Platoon is
Willem Dafoe is just like, well, we had some free time, so we went to join the revolution.
Right?
Says it nonchalantly.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, we didn't have anything better to do, so
Yeah, we were like, let's join the revolution. Amazing.
yeah, like I think he mentions in another interview like about, or I don't know, or like I think one of his cast members, pala, I think like mentioned like how they were like actually on the streets with the people and sharing his experience. So great.
That's wonderful.
So great. So, whenever you're in the Philippines and you're driving down along EDSA, you can just tell yourself Willem Dafoe stepped
Willem
on.
Dafoe is here.
He breathed this
He breathes
pollution-ridden air that
Mhm.
I'm breathing now.
Exactly. No, I mean, that's very optimistic for you to be saying you'll be driving down EDSA. You'll probably just be sitting in EDSA while the traffic. Anyway,
That's true. That is more accurate.
so we've hit the 1 hour mark, and we want to kind of go into the last, not last, but like kind of the not even main, like one of the big parts that we wanted to like bring up here, which is Marcos era horror stories, which is what relates it to our horror podcast. Because even though our horror podcast story was mostly made up, like based on some urban legends, but essentially like fictional, there are some real life horror stories we want to mention, and which also have like a mythical element to them, but then they are tied because of how ubiquitous they are to Philippine culture. There is an element of real horror to them that we want to share. So should we do the bridge or the film center first? What do you think, Reg and Yoyi?
Okay.
Hmm.
Well, the film center is the more known one among Filipinos. We can start with the bridge one.
Yeah. Okay. So, there's something called the San Juanico Bridge, and we will
Yeah.
tell a little bit of Reg will tell a little bit of the story. But just for some context, it basically is so well known that I actually watched recently a list, like one of those like YouTubers who do like 10 lists of 10 things that blah blah
Yeah,
blah.
yeah.
And this
Mhm.
like usually a white presenter, and like in this case it was like a white guy who is like San Juanico Bridge. He was essentially telling 10 urban legends of the Philippines. One of them was the San Juanico Bridge. So yeah, go on, Reg. Let us know about what the story is.
Mhm. Yeah, so the San Juanico Bridge, I think it's known as the longest bridge in the Philippines. It connects the two islands, Samar and Leyte, and it's supposedly a gift from Ferdinand Marcos to his wife Imelda because she's from Leyte, and the bridge cost millions of dollars. It was built in the 70s, but the story goes is during the time of construction, children kept disappearing in the islands of Samar and Leyte, and it was just children. There's many versions of the story, but the one thing in common is that it all involved children. And mysteriously, the vanishing of the children only stopped after the bridge was finally finished. And the urban legend, so we don't know if these disappearances are confirmed, but that's how the story goes. And the theory here is that Imelda, there's different versions. It was either Imelda or it was the woman who was in charge of overseeing the bridge construction. But for the purposes of this podcast, let's say Imelda. Imelda heard from um, a fortune teller, a fortune teller. What do you, like a not a mangkukulam, manghuhula there. She
Mm-mm.
heard
Mm.
from Mangkula that the foundations of the bridge would be made stronger by mixing in the blood of babies and street children. And that's the reason that children went missing, because their bodies and their blood were added to the cement mixer, while construction workers, cement mixers, while the construction workers were preparing for it to be used. And that's how the story goes. And there's also a version of this story. This is the version where it's the woman in charge who, the nameless, construction manager, I don't know what you call them, who, this is the version where she's the one who ordered the children to be kidnapped and murdered. So story goes in this version that, what do you call this? 'Cause so like the bodies of the children were just thrown away in the river after they were drained of blood, and this was all seen by the river fairy. And in revenge, the river fairy cursed the woman overseeing the construction, and the legs of the woman grew scales and started emitting like this fishy smell, which is why she always wears long skirts and gowns to hide her legs.
Mm.
Yeah, and apparently she died of mysterious circumstances. The last place she was seen at was near the river, and to this day, sometimes you might be able to see the ghost of a woman with fishy scales, just trapped by the curse of the river. Just yeah, I don't know how to end the story, but that's the urban legend of the San Juanico Bridge. So I wanted to start off with that because that's a little more fantastical, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-mm.
the one about the film center that Motzie is going to share after this. This one's a bit more impactful because this one I think has a little more foundation. Foundation in truth. I think.
Please don't say that.
Aha. Aha. I
Don't,
see.
don't give
Hmm.
a
We're
giggle.
talking a lot about construction.
Don't give a
Pun not
giggle about
intended.
that. My God. Okay, no. Okay. So the Manila Film Center.
Pun not intended. Yeah. Sorry about bad joke.
Oh no, but yeah, okay. So essentially,
Sorry. Yeah.
it's okay. No, I would have like, I would have like instinctually made that joke, but then realized later, like, no, shouldn't make that joke.
Which is what happened here. Sorry about that. I didn't
Mm.
mean to do that. That was a
That's
bad
okay.
joke.
That's
That
okay.
was
But
just like instinctive reaction.
instantaneous.
Like,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah.
It's
I
all right.
totally understand, and it is like related to what
Understandable.
we're
Yeah.
going to
Mm.
talk about. Yeah. So
yeah.
essentially,
Mm-mm.
the Manila Film Center is one of the most famous like ghost stories slash like cursed places in the Philippines. And the reason for this is because back in the Marcos era, Imelda, who was a patron of the arts, which translation had a huge ego, still does. But essentially, she wanted to have a film center and do a film festival in the Philippines that rivaled like world film festivals. Like Imelda was very essentially very interested in kind of putting the Philippines in a world stage, but in a way that essentially just made her and like that was centering on her family. It was yeah, she has that tendency, but
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in this particular incident. There was a tragedy that happened during the building of the film center because they were building it quite quickly. They wanted to get done as soon as possible,
Mm-mm.
but unfortunately there was an accident and many people, because it was like a cement building, many people got buried under debris and in quick drying cement. And
Mm.
essentially the rumors went all the way up to 160 people, 100 like 130 to 160 people were buried under that cement. And what happened was, the rumor, like the story goes, Imelda or whoever was like overseeing this project wanted to build over the bodies of the people who had been buried alive. So just so they could finish the project as fast as possible. And obviously, like, this is all hearsay, like that she would have done that or that they would have done that. But the real thing that happened is that they had delayed ambulances, they had delayed rescue, they had closed off that entire area to anybody for 9 hours. And which, obviously, like, within the first like hour you have to have like people get rescued, but they had closed it off, essentially, like, to stop media from covering it. Which, yeah, so like, the number of deaths is not 100% confirmed, but the confirmed number was around, for the number, like, hundreds, like 9 is the confirmed number. But at the same time, like, they definitely delayed rescue for this particular thing because they wanted to build over them. And the story goes, after this, when the film center was finally built, essentially they had manghuhula again. Like, the manghuhula comes in again. And if you think it's weird that a presidential family would um would ascribe to the speech of,
Superstition
yeah, superstition.
of a fortune teller. It's
Yeah, fortune
absolutely
teller.
part of the
Very
culture.
common. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, did your mother do this, Reg? Because my mother did
Oh
something.
yeah, absolutely. My mom is very much into feng shui.
Exactly. So it's like, it's very common, like, to have a set like a fortune teller or some kind of like superstitious belief. And in this particular
Mhm.
one, they were told that Amy Marcos, who is the daughter of Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos, who is also is also in government right now for some reason. Um, it was said that if she stepped foot in the film center, she would immediately die. And so they brought literally a bunch of people from the Cordillera region, mountain people, okay, like people who lived in the Cordillera Mountains, to come in and bless this place with indigenous spiritual energy in order to
Mm.
remove the hauntings, to remove the angry spirits, which sounds insane, but the tragedy really happened. And to this day, they still say that the Manila Film Center is haunted, and the only people brave enough to perform in the Manila Film Center are drag queens. So it became defunct. Like, it was basically like abandoned for a little while. Then they repurposed it for some performances, and the only people with the positive energy to perform in the Death Center was drag queens. So that's the story of the
Power
Manila
to
Film
them.
Center. Yeah, power to them, exactly. So yeah, like, that's the story of the Manila Film Center, and it's one of many. And I think the San Juanico Bridge one, obviously, like, fictional that they put the blood of children into the bridge, but it's real that children were disappearing during this
Yeah.
era. Like, for what reason
Mm.
we don't know,
Mm.
but like, what if a bunch of children are disappearing so often during your presidency? I would have to say that it at least has to be your responsibility, if not your fault. So I'm not the it's very common in the Marcos era that, like, people died, people were disappeared, and we didn't even go into the torture. But we're not going to go into the torture, really. There are articles online that detail the tortures that were documented during the Marcos regime, and the people who were tortured, including students, activists, random people on the street, like people that m- allies of Marcos didn't like, etc., etc. Like, literally anybody could be
Like
taken.
literally even
Mm.
just
Mm.
people who annoyed his children.
Yeah,
And yeah, and that's how we have like the disappearance of Archimedes Trajano.
yeah, yeah. It's like, even like, I think the
Yeah,
reason.
because he pissed off Amy Marcos.
Mhm. Parts
And
of the
it's never
reason.
confirmed that it was her fault, but he disappeared that same night he spoke up against her.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I think that, unfortunately, in many cases, in many circumstances, when many poor people and many people who are of a lower class are affected, nothing really happens in response. But when somebody who is an upper class starts getting affected, and people in from the upper class are also getting affected by this, especially young people who were activists, that's when, like, that's when the pushback started happening, which is so unfortunate, and yet the truth. Because when, like, these are the people whose parents, whose families have power, have the power to kind of like fund and or push back against the powers that be. So that plus the sheer number of people who pushed back against Marcos. And we don't want to like repeat that. Like this is not something we do not want a repeat of this regime. This is the reason we remember people power. This is the reason we have horror stories. This is the reason. And
Yeah.
right now, no matter what, no matter who you vote for, just don't vote for Marcos. That is the
Absolutely. And
biggest
yeah, we don't
part.
want to repeat because to this day we are still living with the consequences of that regime. Because the worst parts were the deaths, the torture, the suppression. But you also can't forget that because a lot of the arguments are, oh, well, at least like we prospered economically. No, no, we didn't. We ended up deep in poverty because of the loans the Marcoses because of the loans the Marcoses took out for their like extravagant
Yeah,
projects.
and they pocketed most of the money that they were supposed to put into
Pocketed most of the
those
money anyway.
infrastructure
A
anyway.
lot of those projects were we famously we have giraffes and zebras and I guess like African safari animals in Palawan because that's one of Imelda Marcos's projects when she went to Africa. And this is just an example of how entitled and out of touch Imelda is. She went to Africa and she was like, oh, like I really want these animals. Like, why can't we have them? So she shipped all these African animals to an island in the Philippines, and in the process, displaced the entire community there. And
They
that's just one
starved.
example. They
Yeah,
starved,
they starved.
absolutely.
They lost their homes. They starved because Imelda wanted the zoo. And that's one of the that's also like for more information, watch The Kingmaker. But
Yeah.
also, there are I think the biggest thing is that when you really think about it, like, did we really prosper? Here's the thing: when you're given, let's say like $1,000, right, and then you spend $2,000, and while you're spending it, everything seems great. But then but then you toss that debt to somebody else, and they have to pay the extra $1,000, and that $1,000 accumulates more debt. That's what happened with the Marxists. They spent all their money, and then they put all of the like they put the responsibility of earning back that money onto every president after them. And that's
Absolutely.
what they did. They didn't prosper. They didn't make the Philippines prosper. They stole our money. They used some of it to make nice buildings, and then the rest of the money that they did not pay back had to be paid
Yeah.
back by every single administration after them. So the Marcoses are the reason the Philippines is poor right now,
And
which
they're still living
should
off of
anger
their
you.
stolen goods.
Yeah, and they're still rich, so that should anger you. That's where all your money went. And anyone who believes otherwise, like, does not know how money works. Like, oh, we prospered during their time because they used the money. All the money we had is gone because they used it on themselves, and they just made like some things that for other people. But that's like it's like basic logic, and yet like it cannot be applied to the supporters of Marcos. But however, it is very good that when you actually look at I've heard this before, which is that that's the reason that Lenny Robredo is visiting every single place that she can to campaign, because a lot of people just support Marcos because they've never been told anything different. And the fact that she comes to visit them, tells them her plan, and then leaves, and they support Lenny. Because for the most part, like, even though I will say like many Marcos supporters are paid, many Marcos supporters benefit, many Marcos supporters are morally corrupt, many of them just don't know that there's any other option. So just giving them that knowledge is so important. So yeah, like, I know we kind of just went off politically on this, but we've always been a political podcast. Like, we've never hidden that. We may not what do you call it, like, it may not be our main topic, but our stories have always been
Yeah.
based in
We don't shy
issues.
away from we don't shy away from using the political landscape as a backdrop for Mary's stories and her parents' stories.
Exactly, the horror stories happen because of what's happening in the Philippines, and I just wanted you all to know that. And we are so happy that you got to join us for this stream. I think we had a little bit of fun ranting and like kind of getting all of this out.
This is really just our vent stream.
Yeah, it's event stream.
Um, yeah.
That's also
So
the
yeah,
reason
just
that Filipinos have this day as a holiday for a reason, and we should not forget that. And we should
yeah.
not pretend for a moment that Marcos, like we cannot divorce the name of Marcos from the name from the horrors and that we were able to escape. So please don't bring him back. Please fight.
Especially if he's still benefiting from it.
He's still benefiting from it. He still flies first class and all that bull. So
Mhm.
yeah, please
Yeah.
do your best to stop him. We're
Yeah.
gonna do our best. We're gonna vote for Lenny. We're gonna because she seems to be the biggest like contender and also just a good choice. But
Mhm.
essentially, our main thing here is just don't vote for Marcos. Like, just don't do it.
Don't vote for Marcos. There are people who walked during the EDSA March, so that's like another nickname for People Power Revolution. There are people who joined that revolution who are still alive today.
Mhm.
Like my parents were alive. They were children then, but they were alive, and there are actually like people who were adults at the time who really took up arms and stood up against Marcos, who fought for our freedom,
Mhm.
and they're still alive today. Oh,
Mhm.
shout out to Rachel Kamaligan.
Kamaligan. Thank you so
Oh,
much, Rachel, for joining us. I'm glad you
Hi.
enjoyed.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for
we're
joining
so
us.
glad you enjoyed. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank
we're about to
you.
end this stream anyway, but like it's
We're
so
wrapping
wonderful you
up.
got to join in. And if anyone has any
Mm.
questions before we start wrapping up, please do comment. We see all your chat we see all of your chat right here, and we are so grateful for everybody who got to join in. For those of you who don't know much about our podcast yet, please do subscribe to us here on YouTube or on Twitch or find our podcast on Podbean or Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you find podcasts. It's the High Night Pod. Even though we haven't really like explained that we are a horror fiction podcast, but we do incorporate a lot of Filipino elements, culture elements, including political elements, depending on like the episode.
Mhm,
And hopefully
Mm-mm.
you enjoy our episodes if you like them. They are scary though, so just
mhm.
please make
Yeah.
sure to check
Mhm.
the
We're
warnings. Yeah,
yeah.
and if you're
We
watching,
Yeah,
are.
yeah.
yeah, sorry, go on.
Oh no, it's okay. Like I'm just gonna say like a few announcements at the end. So go ahead.
Oh, of course. And if you're watching this after the fact, like after the stream, please know that we post our stream schedules on our socials at HiNiPod. So that's HINAYPOD. So that's on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, and Facebook. If you want us on other platforms, please let us know because we are open to that. And while Reg gives the last announcements, I will show you some of our nice art from the last couple of days, just to
All
give you.
right. Yeah, just to give you something nice
Right,
to look.
right, right.
Mhm.
All
Yeah. So
right.
go ahead.
So, uh-huh. So yeah, as Motzie said, we're a horror fiction podcast. For those of you who don't know much about us, it's about a Filipino immigrant married Datuin who solves supernatural mysteries in Toronto. We're currently in our first of two seasons, but we are in Act Two of the three acts in season one.
Exactly.
So yeah, currently we're in Act Two of season one. Next episode, we'll announce the date. We had to prioritize this live stream for a bit, but we will make announcements for when the next episode is coming out. Also, please subscribe. We do have a Patreon, so please subscribe to that. We just released a Patreon exclusive episode.
Um,
Remind me.
w- well, we're about to release it. We just
Sorry,
released
sorry. We're about to.
the excerpt.
Sorry, we're about to release, but we did post the excerpt just to
Yes.
give you something to be excited about.
Mhm.
So, yeah. So, remind me to tell you later is a mini series we have where Motzi, where Mary shares stories about her time as babaylan or a shaman while she was living in the Philippines.
Mhm.
So it has a little bit more of Filipino mythology and horror in it, if that's
Mhm.
what you're interested in. But we also that's one of the goodies you can get when you subscribe to our Patreon. We also have other stuff on Patreon, so please check those out. And if you want to support us, but you can't, but you can't do like a monthly subscription, that's fine because we also have a coffee, ko-fi.com/HiNiPod. You can make one-time donations there. It accepts credit card and debit card, I think, credit, debit card, and PayPal. So if you want to support us and give one-time donations, that's absolutely also something you can do. We're also looking into other modes of payment to help like our Filipino listeners. To give our Filipino listeners more access to donation methods. So we'll be posting more details on that soon. This is just something we're looking into. So yeah, all of that. So please check us out. Thanks, and for those who got to hang out with us, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to us rant.
Yes, thank you so much. Even though it's super dark right now, it's actually morning for me, so I
Yeah,
have to
we're
wake
all
up
in different
quickly.
time zones. Motzie
Yeah.
is actually the only one in Toronto.
Yeah, and Reg and Yoyi are in the Philippines, so which is one
Yep.
time zone. I have to say Toronto because the Americas have three time zones. But yes, thank you so much.
The face
And
of, I think.
no, it's the face of like, oh, we need three time zones. Well, you only need one time zone for a country. What are you talking? No, but the Americas are huge. They need three
Yep.
time zones. It's terrible.
Mm-mm.
But yes, thank you so much. We're all wearing pink for Lenny, and we encourage you to vote for Lenny, but we
This
won't
is
force
my
you to vote.
one pink shirt. One
I
pink.
have listen. I already like it was very lucky for me because I had so many pink outfits already, and I was just like, yes, her
Yeah.
color's pink. I can just wear what I want all the time now.
Yeah. Maybe next time we can have like a Chel Jock live stream because his color is teal. So
We love Chel Jokna. That's true. We
yeah,
can
he
give him
is.
a special mention in March, like when we do another live. We will do. We're planning to do monthly live streams. The themes will be announced on our socials. And you guys can you can follow us and like keep us on notifications so that you can see all of our videos, all of our streams. And we will try to schedule this stream ahead of time. We just learned this is just restream. We're just learning it, but it's working out really well. So thank you so much. And uh, um, what was it? Sorry. Thank you. We love you. Paalam. Goodbye is what we're trying to go with.
Goodbye.
Yeah, for our
Mm.
send off. So thank you, Reg and Yoyi, for joining. Thank you to everybody who was listening, and we hope you enjoyed this rant, the weird Willem Dafoe cameo, which I wasn't expecting either. And oh yeah, and Marcos, you twat.
Yep. Yeah, and don't forget. Yeah. Yeah. Special thanks to Willem Dafoe, Cher, and George Harrison.
Yeah, exactly. Sharon George Harrison. Exactly. All right. Please remember. Yeah, and goodbye,
Yeah,
everybody.
just
And
remember
also,
they're twats.
yeah, exactly. Fuck Marcos. Do not vote for Marcos. Don't do it. Bye.